Namaste. Welcome to the Nirvega Vidya channel. This is Krishna Bharadwaj. And in this video, we shall set foot into the Bhagavad-Gita. This will be the introductory video to a series that we will be doing to cover the NET Yoga syllabus of Bhagavad-Gita. And please bear in mind that these videos, just like our videos on the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, will be extremely concise and to the point. We will not be going in depth or doing a detailed analysis of the shlokas. We will only be covering the important points and restricting the videos to the NET syllabus. There are certain chapters which have not been mentioned in the syllabus, and those we will not be doing. Now, the expectation is that those who watch this video have already been introduced to the Bhagavad Gita. They have already studied it, and these videos are meant to help them to revise. They are meant to serve as a crash course of sorts. So for those who are interested in knowing about the Bhagavad Gita in detail, there really is no dearth of study material when it comes to the Gita. There are numerous books that you can download for free online. There are multiple videos that you will find on YouTube by renowned speakers, by esteemed speakers who are professors or sannyasis belonging to different orders. Those are available. So please do refer to them. If I myself come across certain videos that I feel are relevant from the NET point of view, I will be sharing the link in the comment section. So with that, let's get started. This, as I said, is an introductory video. So we will not be So we will not be going into the concepts as such. We're just going to look at a general introduction and the definitions of yoga. Again, I'm just going to be enumerating the four main definitions that we find in the Gita about yoga, not going to explain them in detail. Again, because I feel the Bhagavad Gita is not as such a new topic for most of us. Most of us must have been introduced to it in some form. So this is only a crash course that we are providing. Now, before I get into the introduction, there is an incident that I wish to share with you. This happened in 1945 when the World War II was going on, towards the end of World War II. There was a research project called the Project Manhattan, which was run by the USA and Great Britain, who were the allies in the war. Now, their intention, the purpose of this project was to conduct research and development of nuclear weapons to help them in the war against Germany and their forces. Now, there was a person involved in Project Manhattan, a very important person, whose name was Robert Oppenheimer. Now, Oppenheimer is considered to be, he's a theoretical physicist, an American theoretical physicist, who is considered to be the father of the atomic bomb. Now, in 1945 July, the first atomic bomb was tested by Project Manhattan under the supervision and guidance of Oppenheimer in July 1945. Now, when the first successful test of the atomic bomb happened, when Oppenheimer witnessed it, he reported later that when he saw the blast going off, he was reminded of two verses from the Bhagavad Gita. There were two verses, he said, that ran across his mind. And Oppenheimer, by the way, was a man who was learned in Sanskrit. He knew Sanskrit, and he had read the original Sanskrit version of the Bhagavad Gita. So it was something that he had read originally, the original Sanskrit. And he said that there were two verses that ran through my mind. The first one, both of these verses are from the chapter 11, the Vishwarupa darshan of that chapter. The first shloka is the 12th shloka of the 11th chapter, which is Sanjaya's report of what Arjuna saw in the Vishwarupa to Dhritarashtra. Sanjaya reports the Vishwarupa in a nutshell to Dhritarashtra in this shloka. Divi Surya Sahasrasya Bhavet Yukapaduttita Yadi Bha Sadrushi Sasyat Bhasastasya Mahatmanaha, which means the sight that Arjuna saw, whatever Arjuna saw in the Vishwarupa, had the brightness and resplendence which was equal to the resplendence of 1,000 suns rising up in the sky at the same time. Divi Surya Sahasrasya, 1,000 suns rising up in the sky at the same time. So that is how he describes the splendor of the Vishwarupa seen by Arjuna. And Oppenheimer says this was one of the verses that ran through his mind because, the atomic bomb must have generated a huge amount of light, and perhaps he thought of this. The second verse, which he reports that ran through his mind, I found it to be extremely chilling and profound. The second verse is, it again comes from the same chapter towards the end of the Vishwarupa Darshanam. And Krishna says in that verse, Kalosmi lokakshaya krit pravriddho, lokan samahartum hiya pravrittaha, which means I am time, the destroyer of the worlds. I am here bringing about the destruction of everything that is to take place in this Kurukshetra battle. So he tells to Arjuna that don't think that you are the one who is going to be killing everybody. It is I who am going to be doing that. I am time. I am dominant time, the destroyer of the worlds. Loka Kshaya Krit. I am the one who brings about all this destruction. So Oppenheimer says that this was the second verse which ran through his mind. Now we must understand that the moment that the atomic bomb was successfully tested was a very important point in the history of mankind. Never before had man wielded such power in his hands. The power of man to wreak destruction had reached catastrophic proportions when the atomic bomb was successfully tested. So we must understand that Oppenheimer, being the father of the atomic bomb, he must have had so many emotions going on in his mind at that time. And also, this happened in July. The testing happened in July. It was in August that Hiroshima and Nagasaki were bombed. And we all know the magnitude of destruction that took place in Japan because of the atomic bomb. So perhaps Oppenheimer had a vision of what his invention would eventually lead to. And this was the verse that ran through his mind. The verse where Krishna says, I am the destroyer of the worlds. I found this extremely chilling and profound when I read about it. And this made me realize what, according to me, is the greatness of the Gita. The greatness of the Bhagavad-Gita, according to me, is not so much about the profundity of the statements that we find in it. It is not so much about the profundity of the knowledge that it gives us. It is more, the greatness lies more in the fact that it is a universal text. By universal, I mean that anybody who reads the Gita will find at least one shloka out of the 700 shlokas that he can relate to, that he feels, yes, I understand what he means. I get it, It is that kind of a scripture. It is meant for everybody. It is meant for the layman. It is meant for the scientist. It is meant for the philosopher, everybody. Which is why you will find so many people belonging to so many different diverse fields who have spoken highly about the Gita. Mahatma Gandhi says that during his down days, the days where he is sorrowful, where he feels misery, it is the Bhagavad Gita which gives him the strength to move on. It is the Bhagavad Gita which gives him positivity. He actually wrote a Gujarati commentary on the Bhagavad Gita when he was in prison. Similarly, we find Lokamanya Bal Gangadhar Tilak, a freedom fighter again. He wrote his commentary called the Karma Yoga Rahasya when he was in prison. So, and also more recently, the erstwhile president of India, the late Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, he was an avid reader of the Bhagavad Gita. Apparently, it is reported that he used to chant the shlokas. So we find that people of varied fields, different fields, politicians, scientists, different people who have nothing to do with spirituality as such, perhaps, or with philosophy, perhaps, because most of the scriptures that we find in Hinduism, be it the Upanishads or the Brahma Sutra, for example, whatever else we find, they are to a certain extent limited to people who are philosophers and people who are, undertaking a spiritual journey, or to academics, right? But the Bhagavad Gita has a reach that transcends all these barriers. It is for everybody. It is meant for the layman. And that is why it is considered an important scripture in Hinduism. We might have heard that the Bhagavad Gita is the holy book of the Hindus. Now, that is, I would not consider that an accurate statement, because it cannot be compared with the Quran or the Bible when we say that it is the authoritative or the holy book of the Hindus. We have multiple holy books, and if at all there is a certain book which has to be given that privilege in Hinduism, I would say it has to be the Upanishads or the Vedanta or the Vedas, because they are considered to be authoritative. The Bhagavad Gita as such is a smriti, and smritis are not generally considered to be authoritative texts. But anyways, uh, the reason why it is given so much importance within Sanatana Dharma is, in my opinion, because of the fact that it is meant for everybody. The message that it propounds is universal. It is not sectarian, and that is its greatness. So I just wanted to share this incident with you, even though it has really nothing to do with the NET syllabus. I found it extremely interesting, so I wanted to share it with you. And if you look at it, you will also find numerous statements by people of different fields who have reported the impact that the Gita has had on their lives. And there are numerous chilling instances such as these. So without further ado, let's get started with the general introduction to the Bhagavad Gita. As we all know, it is a part of the Mahabharata, which is an itihasa, which is considered to be a history, a scripture speaking about the history of India. And it is found in the Bhishma Parva. Now, there are 12 Parvas or main chapters in the Mahabharata. Bhishma Parva is the sixth Parva, the sixth of the chapters. And the Bhagavad Gita is a part of the Bhishma Parva. It is considered to be the Smriti Prasthana of Vedanta Darshana. Now, as we all know, the Vedanta prescribes to a Prasthana Traya. There are three foundational texts of Vedanta philosophy: Brahma Sutras, Upanishads, and the Bhagavad Gita. Now, the Bhagavad Gita is considered to be the Smriti Prasthana since it forms part of the Mahabharata, which is a Smriti text. We've covered this in our earlier videos where we spoke about the different classes of scriptures within Hinduism. Now, this was given independent recognition, the Bhagavad Gita was given independent recognition by Adi Shankara, who wrote his celebrated Bhashya on the Gita. Now, it is reported that before the time of Adi Shankara, which was late 8th century and early 9th century, there is controversy regarding his time period, but the usually accepted date is 788 CE to 820 CE, 32 years. That's the time where he is reported to have lived. Now, during that time is when the Bhagavad Gita was given independent recognition. Till that time, it had only been seen as a part of the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata was an important text, and Bhagavad Gita was seen as a part of it. But it was Adi Shankara who first removed it separately. Separately in the sense, he gave it separate importance and wrote a commentary only on the Bhagavad Gita. That was the first instance of somebody writing a commentary on the Bhagavad Gita, recognizing it as an independent scripture. And after Adi Shankara wrote his commentary, which is a very popular commentary, and which is what I will be mostly sticking to in my interpretation of the various chapters of Bhagavad Gita, there have been numerous other commentaries that have been written by various people, by a lot of philosophers. There are about 20 classical commentaries and numerous modern commentaries on the Gita. There are more than 25 commentaries in Sanskrit alone. There are commentaries by Ramanuja. Adi Shankara's commentary is a commentary which looks at the Gita from an Advaita standpoint. Ramanuja's commentary looks at it from Vishishta Advaita standpoint, and Madhva's commentary again looks at it from Dvaita standpoint. So, and there is also a commentary by Vallabhacharya which interprets it in a Shuddha Advaita fashion. So there are various commentaries written by various acharyas of Hinduism, propagating their own views. Again, as I told you, there is a commentary written by Balagangadhar Tilak, which interprets the Bhagavad Gita as a scripture dealing with Karma Yoga. According to Tilak, the main purport of the Gita is to extol Karma Yoga. So that is his opinion. So there are so many commentaries written by multiple people, interpreting the Gita in their own light. And there are also various modern commentaries by Aurobindo, by Swami Chinmayananda, a lot of them that we will be finding. This goes on to show the popularity that it enjoys. It is one of the most, if not the most popular and important Hindu texts, and enjoys great scholarly interest even today. Now, of late, we see that yoga has become a very popular aspect of Hindu philosophy. And even when you take yoga, the Bhagavad Gita is an important text in yoga as well. It is considered to be a yoga shastra. It deals with the different kinds of yoga, which we will be seeing. So it enjoys great interest among both scholars and among philosophers, among spiritualists even today. The Bhagavad Gita, the contents of the Bhagavad Gita, it contains 700 shlokas, which are verses, distributed in 18 adhyayas or chapters, each of which is called a yoga. So the first one is called the Arjuna Vishada Yoga. The second one is called Sankhya Yoga. It goes on like that. Each chapter is considered to be a yoga. It chiefly contains the dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna, but Sanjaya and Dhritarashtra too are speakers in it. The very first statement of the Bhagavad-Gita is delivered by Dhritarashtra. Dharmakshetre Kurukshetre Samaveta Yujsavaha. So that is by Dhritarashtra. So there are 4 speakers in the Bhagavad-Gita: Dhritarashtra, Sanjaya, Krishna and Arjuna. The major part obviously is the dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna. The Bhagavad Gita is notable for its broad-minded conception of yoga and its simple and relatable language. In Bhagavad Gita, we see Krishna laying out multiple paths for a man to attain spiritual progress. He talks about Sankhya Yoga, he talks about Karma Yoga, he talks about Dhyana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga. There are various paths that he speaks of. So he takes a very broad outlook on the concept of yoga itself. And the Bhagavad Gita is very notable for that. And also its simple and relatable language. Any person with a basic understanding of Samskrita can understand the Bhagavad Gita. So, which is why again it is considered to be a scripture which is meant for even the layman. The Upanishads, Brahma Sutras cannot be read by everybody. They cannot be understood by everybody. One needs a prior philosophical understanding in order to understand the Upanishads. But the Bhagavad Gita is not like that. It is meant for everybody, for the layman, for everybody, irrespective of their station in life or what they do and all that. It is regarded as a Yoga Shastra, which means a scripture dealing with yoga, and a Moksha Shastra, which is a scripture dealing with liberation. So this is a basic introduction to the Bhagavad Gita. I have not gone too much into detail because I'm sure Bhagavad Gita is not a new scripture to any of us. So this is the introduction. Now, I'll just wrap up this video quickly by covering this topic, the different definitions of yoga that we find in the Bhagavad Gita. This again has been covered in the very first video that we put up on our channel, which is the introduction to yoga. But again, we will be looking at them again. There are 4 main definitions that we find in the Bhagavad Gita about yoga. The first and probably the most popular one is Samatvam Yoga Uchyate, which means yoga is equanimity. Krishna says that yoga is when a person can be stable in mind. He is not too happy when good things happen and he is not too sad when bad things happen. Between the pairs of opposites, he remains stable. So that is yoga, according to Krishna. This appears in the second chapter, Sankhya Yoga, 48th shloka. The second one, again equally popular, is Yoga Karmasu Kaushalam. Yoga is skill in action. And this again is the 50th shloka of the second chapter. The third one is Yogo Bhavati Dukkha, which comes at the end of the shloka, Yukta Hara Viharasya Yukta Cheshtasya Karmasu Yukta Swapnava Bodhasya Yogo Bhavati Dukkha, which means to a man who is moderate in whatever he does, to a man who is moderate in his sleep, in his eating, in his activities, to such a man of moderation, yoga becomes the destroyer of miseries. So that is what this means. So Yogo Bhavati Dukkha means yoga becomes the destroyer of miseries. This comes in chapter 6th as the 17th shloka. And the fourth and the last definition of yoga, important definition that we find in the Gita, is Tam Vidya Dukkha Sanyoga Viyogam Yoga Sangnitam, which means that is yoga by which one attains detachment from the miseries that are caused by attachments. When we are attached to things, that is when miseries take place. That is when we experience misery. And when we detach ourselves from these attachments, that is called yoga. That is said to be yoga. This again comes in the 6th chapter as the 23rd shloka. Now this one is an interesting definition because we've usually seen that yoga means union, to unite, derived from the root yuj. But here Krishna defines yoga as viyogam, as a process of disjunction, as separating oneself, which is again the same sense in which Patanjali speaks of yoga in his Yoga-Sutras. Yoga there is again a separation of Purusha from Prakriti. It is not a union. So this is an interesting definition, and these are the 4 important definitions that we of yoga that we find in the Bhagavad Gita. So with that, we come to the end of this video, which is an introductory video. From the next video onwards, we will be looking at each chapter and important topics under each chapter. In the next video, we will be looking at chapter 2, which is Sankhya Yoga, and the important topics under it. Thank you.